All right, Flyer fans, your turn. And that means that tomorrow it'll be Pittsburgh, St. Louis, San Jose, and then we're out of here. Um, so Philly, up year, down year, up year, down year. This is kind of a standard for them. 82 points last year, 98 the year before, 88 the year before that, 96 the year before that, 84 the year before that. I talked about this in last year's preview too, where I talked about make the playoffs, miss the playoffs, make the playoffs, miss the playoffs. And for people who are going to say, well, Philly's not going to make the playoffs this year, here's the thing. They haven't missed back-to-back playoffs since a 5-year span that went from 1990 to 1994. That's 25 years ago. And these guys have been able to bounce back and get back into the playoffs, even after some horrendous seasons. And this year wasn't really a horrendous season. It just didn't go the way that was expected for them, which is standard every other year right now for Philly. They were 240, or they had 244 goals. They were 17th overall. Goals against 281. They were 29th in that category, and they played 8 goaltenders. New NHL record, and it's not a record that you want to have. It's a sign that there's a tremendous problem and that there's a lot of injury issues. And so for Philly right now, in all honesty, I think they're in better shape than they were last year because their goaltending looks pretty steady. And last year, it looked shaky right from the outset. By the end of October, they were 5-7. And this is kind of what I was talking about, where Elliott got off to a tough start, and then he was injured. And their record at the end of November was 10-12-2, 15-18-5 at the end of December, 22-23-6 by the end of January, 30-26-8 by the end of February, and that's where they started playing better. So they were 8-3-2 in the month of February, and it starts to show you where they can get to. So they start getting better. It's not a coincidence Carter Hart was in net. He played very well behind a defense that was kind of shaky at times. And I understand why they blew up the defense. I absolutely do. There's one guy I forgot to put on the out here. I'm going to do that now while I'm talking to you fine people. And the defense wasn't solid all year for these guys. 37-34-8 was the record at the end of March, and they ended up 37-37-8. It is easy to forget due to that face plant they did at the nosedive, they did at the end of the season. It's easy to forget this was a team that was in contention for a playoff spot with a few weeks left, and they just couldn't catch a break. Now, coming into this season, they know where they're at. I think having Carter Hart makes a huge difference. That being said, their MVP, I still say, is Sean Couturier. And I know other people are like, what about Giroux? Giroux's a great forward. I think Couturier is their MVP. When Couturier is going, the team's doing very, very well. As stated, in the last 5 years, out of the playoffs in 2019, they were out in round 1 in 2018, out of the playoffs in 2017, out in the first round in 2016, and missed the playoffs in 2015, which means in 2014 they made the playoffs. Out of the lineup from last year, I have Talbot, I have Gudas, and that's just from the end of the season, so that doesn't include other guys who left at the deadline or before the deadline. It's not a huge turnover from where they ended last year to now. And they didn't really need one. Goals leader, I expect Couturier to lead there again. That being said, James Van Riemsdyk, if healthy and firing in all cylinders, is capable of 35. Dark horse, I went with Nolan Patrick because he's already kind of a forgotten entity outside of Philly. I'm sure Flyers fans are well aware of what he might be capable of. But outside of Philly, the excitement's kind of died down. We got the shiny new toys in other cities now. So it's easy to kind of forget all about Nolan Patrick. If Patrick were able to take that next step, and if he does it playing center rather than on the wing, where he's been at times during his short NHL career, that could change the whole picture in Philadelphia. On the what about list, I have Philippe Myers. When the coaching and general manager change took place, part of the idea was Philippe Myers had earned himself a roster spot and deserved to kick through the glass ceiling and get onto the Flyers roster, and he did, and he played well, and now it looks like he's outside the top 6 again. Right now, I would say it's highly unlikely he's top 6, and so that's kind of strange because he was playing well. So I didn't put him down as trade bait. I put down Gostisbehere because every year we're going to hear about how Shane Gostisbehere is getting traded. So I figured I'll throw him on the board because we're always talking about Ghost. Where's Ghost going to go? He was going to go to Montreal. He was going to go to Toronto. He was going to go to wherever. I think if somebody's looking for a mobile defenseman who can score a ton of points, Ghost is going to be on that radar. And if the Flyers decide to move on from him, there won't be any shortage of takers. And the other nice thing with Philly is there's a lot of depth on that blue line now. A ton of depth. And we'll see whether or not it's a better blue line and whether or not they get better results this year than last year. So, looking at the roster, up front you got Claude Giroux, Sean Couturier, and Travis Konechny. Now, Konechny right now is a holdout. He's a restricted free agent. I'm not going to let that decide whether or not I put him on the board or where I'm going to put him on the board. I'm going to assume all the restricted free agents get signed because I'm an optimist. James Van Riemsdyk, Kevin Hayes, and Jacob Voracek. This is going to be very interesting because Kevin Hayes signed a contract. It was a lot of money. A lot of money. About $50 million for Kevin Hayes over 7 years. It's a lot of money and it's a lot of term. So if Hayes is going to prove the doubters wrong, this is a good time to do it because he's between Van Riemsdyk and Voracek in all likelihood. Unless Voracek ends up here and Konechny ends up on that second line. Now, another wild card on this team is on that third line I've got here, which is Oscar Lindblom and Morgan Frost. Morgan Frost down the middle. If he's ready and if he's what he's supposed to be, he's the offensive guy he's supposed to be, and he is one that other teams were asking for in trade, and the Flyers would hang up on him. Frost could push Hayes down to third line center. Nolan Patrick I've got on that third line as well. Fourth line then would be either Raffl or Vorobyov on the left side. Scott Lawton, fourth line, which kind of bothers me a little bit. I think Scott Lawton deserves to be higher than four. I think he's a third line center ideally. So he may end up being a guy who either plays that third line center spot and maybe Frost gets some American Hockey League time, or if Frost is ready and they can't justify putting him in the American League, maybe Lawton's dangled out there as somebody for trade as well. And Tyler Pitlick, a guy who the Flyers are going to like Pitlick a lot, honestly. Good player. You guys are going to like him. Depth-wise, you got German Rubtsov, who's waiting his chance. May push his way through. Nicholas Albe-Kubel. Joel Farabee is a wild card here on the left side. And another example of how we've got a lot of good young talent in the NHL. So when you're talking about why there's so many veterans out there that don't have contracts, I would point to a guy like Joel Farabee, who may very well be ready for an NHL spot and could end up pushing another veteran out while we're still waiting on other veterans to get signed. Chris Stewart's on a tryout. I don't see Chris Stewart making this team, to be completely honest. Because who does he push out? Who does he push out of that roster? And then Curtis Gabriel is there as well. He played some games last year. He'll likely get into some games this year. So to the blue line, and Ivan Provorov, who's also a restricted free agent, likely going to command more money than Konechny, but we'll see what ends up happening. This is crazy time for free agent money. Travis Sanheim, Shane Gostisbehere, and Justin Braun likely make up the top four. That being said, Robert Haig was excellent last year. Big defenseman, and Philadelphia's always liked their big defenseman. Matt Niskanen was added, of course, from Washington. Adds a little bit more pop than Radko Gudas, who exited the team. And that's a really good top six. And then you've got Samuel Mora, Philippe Myers, as I mentioned before, Andy Walensky, Nate Prosser. And I put Chris Biggrass on the board, even though he likely doesn't get time, because it's kind of surprising to me that he didn't make it to the NHL and end up being a regular. Just a little bit. Now, in net, Carter Hart, as far as I'm concerned, he's a starter. You may find some who put Brian Elliott in as the starter. That's the spirit, but Carter Hart's going to be the starter. He is going to play a lot. He played a ton for the Flyers in some big games down the stretch, and he played very well. And I would expect him to be the starter this year. Good pedigree, highly thought of prospect right out of the gate, and I haven't seen anything in his game yet to make me say, yeah, maybe he's overrated. Nope. I put Alex Lyon on the board as the number 3 because I think he's the most likely to get called up if there's an injury to the goaltending core. That being said, is he the best one that they have? Probably not, but he's probably the one that gets called up. I would say he's number 3 on the charts for now. So that being said, and looking over this team, are they a playoff team? That's the big question mark. Now, I would say that Carter Hart is good enough to get them into the playoffs. I would say that their attack, and again, a lot of this is going to depend on injury concerns, As long as everybody remains healthy, and if Kevin Hayes lives up to that contract, they have the offense. It's the blue line. If the blue line struggles at all, again, if some of these young kids are really struggling again, I would look for a move to be made before Christmas. I think the patience for the Flyers is thin. I think they realize that they've got to take advantage of Giroux being in his prime. Couturier plays some of his best hockey, and James Van Riemsdyk still technically in his prime as well. I think the pressure to make the playoffs is there. And not only that, but once they get there, I don't think they want to just be one and done. I don't think they want to be out in the first round again for the third time in 5 years. Do I expect them to be back in the playoffs? I kind of do. I can't see them finishing lower than, I'll say, 5th in the division. With Carter Hart and net, I'll go with likelihood of 3rd to 5th. But again, it's the Metro, right? In the Metro, it's this wild, crazy thing where the Flyers could end up being last. You could see the Flyers bringing up the rear, and that could happen. Now, for that to happen, I would think you'd have to look at an injury to one of their key forwards, and likely Carter Hart going through the struggles that a young goaltender sometimes will. I think we've seen that on some level with Matt Murray in Pittsburgh, where he's had his share of issues. We'll look at Matt Murray tomorrow morning when I do the Penguins preview. But while Carter Hart does have the excellent pedigree, and he's a very good goaltender, and I like him a lot, there absolutely is room there for a setback in what would be year 2 for him. I'm not expecting it. I do think these guys end up in the playoffs. But, again, it's the Metro. You got Washington, you got Pittsburgh, you got the Islanders, you got Carolina, and an improved Rangers team. It is tough to just say, well, yeah, playoffs. In the Atlantic, I think I would be willing to say these guys should be a playoff team. But again, this league there's so much parity. So much parity. So wherever you have these guys finishing, you can come up with an argument. You want to say, you know what, these guys could be a surprise first place team with Carter Hart, with that offensive attack and that blue line coming together, fine. If you want to argue these guys could be the worst ones in the division because of uncertainty on the blue line and a young starting goaltender, yeah, you could have a point there too. This is what makes the Flyers one of the more intriguing teams in the league coming into this season because, again, there's a large shift between each year and their fortunes, which tells you they should bounce back into the 96 to 98 point range this year, which should be good enough for the playoffs. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. As always, don't forget to hit like and subscribe. If you're browsing your way through, you just happened upon this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.